She was the kind of woman everyone wanted. The problem was, the only one who interested her didn't look away and didn't fall in line. I was halfway through charming a donor. I had no intention of calling back when I saw Gabrielle Delaney standing across the ballroom with another man's hand at the small of her back. That was the moment the night stopped behaving. The gala around me was all candlelight and old money pretending not to stare at itself. Crystal glasses, silk gowns, men who wore confidence like custom tailoring, and women who knew exactly how much power could be hidden inside a smile. My natural habitat, in other words. I had spent most of the evening doing what I always did at events like this, moving through the room in a line of warm collisions, making people laugh, making them feel remembered, making them feel, briefly and dangerously, more important than they really were. It was a gift. It was also a problem. Because people are never more devoted than when you've made them feel chosen. And I had become very good at choosing just enough. Until that night. The donor in front of me, a silver-haired financier with a voice like polished oak and the conversational range of a commemorative plaque, was telling me something earnest about legacy, and I was giving him the face I reserve for rich men who mistake being listened to for being fascinating. Then I saw her. Dark green silk. Bare shoulders. Hair falling in soft waves over one side of her neck. A champagne glass held low in one hand. David Lang leaning in too close beside her, saying something that made her smile. A real smile. Not a social one. Not the careful, restrained expression she used when she was deciding whether a person was worth the trouble. This one was warmer. Easier. Worse. His hand rested there like it belonged. I disliked him instantly. Not because he was unpleasant. That would have been easier. David Lang was annoyingly acceptable by every public standard. Tall. Well-dressed. Litigation attorney. Donor adjacent. The kind of man people describe as solid, which usually means wealthy enough to bore you in private while impressing others in public. He had one of those faces that had probably spent years being told it was reassuring. His posture suggested expensive schools and a mother who still corrected his cufflinks with her eyes alone. And there he was, standing too close to the only woman in the room I wanted looking at me. Across the space, Gabrielle turned her head slightly, and for one disloyal second I had the irrational, almost adolescent urge to walk over there, remove his hand from her body, and ask him whether he routinely tested his luck in public. Instead, I smiled at the donor in front of me and said, "I'm sorry, what was the last part?" He brightened, touched that I cared enough to ask. "Men do love thinking they survived my distraction." I said, he replied with renewed purpose, that institutions are remembered for the standards they protect. I nodded slowly, my eyes already drifting back to the far side of the room. Standards? Yes. Mine were slipping. Behind me, I heard Naomi Harlow murmur, "Oh, this is fun." I didn't turn. Naomi had a gift for appearing at exactly the moment my self-control became entertaining. "I don't know what you mean," I said lightly. "Of course not." I could hear the smile in her voice. "You're only staring at that man like a merger you intend to dismantle." That seems dramatic. It seems accurate. I finally turned my head just enough to glance at her. Naomi looked immaculate in black silk and diamonds small enough to imply real money. She was my closest friend, which meant she had earned the right to be intolerable. Tall, elegant, dry as a desert martini, and incapable of letting me preserve my dignity when she could instead enjoy herself. She lifted her glass. "Should I hold your earrings?" "I'm not jealous." Naomi's mouth twitched. "No, sweetheart. You're simply experiencing elegant internal violence." I looked back across the room. Gabi was listening to David now, but not quite leaning into him, not relaxing into him. Her body language was not possession. It was tolerance. Familiarity, perhaps. Comfort, maybe, but not surrender. That should have relieved me. Instead, it irritated me further, because now I had to think. And before I tell you exactly how I got to the point where another woman's half-smile could ruin an otherwise flawless evening, tell me where you're listening from. I always want to know who's out there with me. And if you like smart, messy women making very poor emotional decisions in expensive rooms, like the video and subscribe. YouTube tends to be suspicious of elegance, unless somebody confirms they approve of it. No. A week earlier, I was still under the delusion that Gabrielle Delaney would be manageable. That Monday began the way most Mondays in my life did, with a skyline view, a perfect coffee, 3 people waiting for my approval before 9:30, and a text from Naomi that read, "Try not to destroy anyone before lunch." It looks needy. I smiled into my espresso and typed back, "No promises. There's a governance review at 10. She replied immediately, "Then at least wear cream. Your Kinder in cream." That, unfortunately, was true. By 10:15, I was in the boardroom wearing ivory silk and quiet authority, listening to a discussion about the company's philanthropic expansion as if it were not, in fact, the only interesting agenda item on the table. I sat at the far end with a stack of briefing papers I had already read twice, a pen I never clicked, and the patience of a woman who had learned a long time ago that the most effective way to dominate a room was rarely volume. Most people expect power to arrive cold. I had learned the opposite. Cold power is useful. Warm power is unforgettable. So I listened. I redirected. I asked questions that made the right people feel intelligent and the wrong people feel exposed. I remembered a trustee's daughter's college acceptance. I complimented one executive on a risk she'd taken last quarter because praise, when used accurately, can buy more loyalty than fear ever will. By the end of the meeting, the room felt not only managed, but grateful. That was usually the reaction. When I stepped out into the corridor afterward, 2 junior associates near the elevator straightened almost imperceptibly. "Morning, Ms. Ashford." "Taylor," I corrected gently. "And don't look so frightened. No one's sending you to Zurich." They laughed, relieved. One of them blushed. People often do around me. Not because I'm cruel. Quite the opposite. Cruel women make people nervous. Warm women make people hopeful. That's far more dangerous. At 11, I stopped by legal to speak with an old colleague who still called me terrifying to my face and brilliant to everyone else. At 11:30, I sent flowers to a museum director after remembering her opening had been postponed. At noon, I ate lunch in my office while declining a dinner invitation from a venture capitalist I had once kissed on a terrace in Tribeca and had no desire to see outside strategic fundraising again. He sent roses anyway. Men do love a symbolic defeat. By 1:30, Naomi was in my office, seated across from me like a darkly amused prosecutor. "You turned down Daniel Pierce?" "I turned down dinner." Same thing in his language. I set my pen down. "Do you ever knock?" "You leave your door open on purpose. It suggests generosity and lets you monitor movement." That was also true. Naomi crossed one leg over the other and studied me with the kind of expression usually reserved for high-level scandals and particularly disappointing men. "Come to the foundation preview tonight." "I'm already going." "I know." She took an almond from the dish on my desk. "I meant come in a mood." "A mood." "Yes." "Less board member." "More woman the city writes about against her will." "I am deeply against being written about." "No, you're against being written about badly." I leaned back in my chair. "And what exactly are you suggesting?" "That you've been bored for months." "I'm not bored." Naomi raised a brow. "Taylor, you are so bored you nearly flirted with the deputy counsel last week out of civic duty. He has beautiful hands. He has spreadsheets in his soul." I smiled despite myself. Naomi always had a way of reducing other people to one catastrophic truth. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "For you to stop collecting beautifully arranged almosts." She tipped her head. "And for one night, possibly, to let something unexpected happen." I looked out at the city. The thing about Naomi was that she loved me too much to flatter me badly. "Unexpected things are usually expensive," I said. She smiled. "You can afford them." By 7:30 that evening, the foundation's preview reception was already glowing when I arrived. It was being held in a renovated industrial gallery the company had funded downtown, a large open space of exposed brick, museum lighting, glass partitions, and polished concrete softened with white florals, jazz, and an ocean of strategically underdressed money. Our newest arts initiative was on display in architectural models, digital installations, and beautifully printed concept books no one would ever read unless I handed one to them and watched. I was in cream, because Naomi had insisted and because she was right. People find me easier to love in pale colors. There is something deeply funny about being one of the most powerful women in a room and still understanding fabric as public relations. I moved through the crowd as I always did. A trustee kissed my cheek. An actor whose foundation we occasionally partnered with held my hand too long. The curator introduced me to two donors from Chicago who were exactly as sincere and underlit as donors from Chicago always are. I asked the right questions, smiled at the right moments, steered one conversation away from taxes and another away from anyone's tragic son in podcasting. Then I felt it. That strange shift in attention before your eyes have fully found the reason. I turned toward the far side of the room and saw her. She stood near the architectural display for the new cultural campus we were co-funding, a scaled model lit from beneath, all clean lines and impossible optimism. She wasn't doing anything remarkable. That was what struck me first. No obvious performance. No bright, calculated laugh. No scan of the room to see who had noticed her. She stood with one hand curved around a champagne glass, listening to an older curator explain something about regional programming as though it genuinely mattered. And if that sounds unimpressive, you have clearly never met the people who usually attend events like these. Most of them listen only long enough to reinsert themselves. She didn't. Dark green silk. Minimal jewelry. Hair loose, glossy, and perfect in exactly the way expensive imperfection is either deeply intentional or naturally unfair. She was not the sort of woman who entered a room and forced it to revolve around her. That was my department. But she had something else. Depth, perhaps. Self-containment. The kind of face that became more dangerous the longer you looked at it. Not the type men call stunning before learning anything. The type intelligent women keep thinking about later against their better judgment. The curator said something. She laughed quietly. I lost the last line of the conversation I was in. The donor beside me paused. Taylor. I blinked once and dragged my attention back to him. I'm sorry, I said smoothly. You were saying something compelling about multi-city engagement. His face brightened like a child handed a lit match. Yes, exactly. Across the room, she still hadn't looked around to see who might be watching. That was what finally annoyed me. Because at an event like this, not caring who's looking either means you're wildly secure or completely unaware of your own effect. Both are a challenge. Naomi appeared beside me as if summoned by appetite. There it is, she murmured. There what is? That expression you get when a woman has accidentally become your next poor decision. She is not my next poor decision. Naomi followed my gaze. Who is she? I was about to ask you. Well, there's your first sign of trouble. You're curious. I am capable of curiosity without emotional collapse. She took a sip of champagne. Tell yourself that. I turned slightly toward one of the foundation staff and with all the innocence I could borrow, asked, the woman near the model, green silk. Who is she? The staff member glanced over. Gabrielle Delaney. Gabi, Director of Cultural Partnerships. I let the name settle once, then again. Gabrielle Delaney. Good name. Elegant. Intelligent. Slightly old-fashioned without trying too hard. How long has she been working with us? I asked. 8 months, officially. Longer, if you count the advisory phase. 8 months. Naomi looked at me over the rim of her glass. Your ego just took that personally. Why haven't I met her? Naomi's mouth curved. Maybe you did. Maybe she failed to orbit. That earned her a look. She smiled wider. There she is. I turned back in time to see Gabrielle lift her eyes. And catch me watching her. Most people do one of 3 things when they catch me looking at them. They blush. They smile too quickly. Or they look away and then back again because curiosity is stronger than discipline. Gabrielle Delaney did none of those. She just held my gaze. Calmly. Directly. Long enough that the air between us became aware of itself. Then barely one eyebrow lifted. Not an invitation. Not in challenge exactly. More like yes? Well, that was new. I handed my empty glass to a passing waiter. I was absolutely going over there, I said. Naomi nearly sighed with pleasure. Of course you are. I made her wait exactly 7 minutes. Not because I needed courage. Because timing is the difference between being elegant and being hungry. By the time I crossed the room, the curator had been claimed by another conversation, and Gabrielle stood alone in front of the display, studying the model as if she actually had standards for architecture and not just men. Either that presentation is better than I was told, I said as I came to stand beside her, or you're being remarkably kind to it. She turned toward me. Up close, she was worse. Hazel green eyes. Beautiful mouth. Fine bones softened by warmth she had not yet decided whether to offer. Not flashy. Not obvious. But dangerously precise. The sort of woman whose face would get more beautiful every time she disagreed with you. Maybe I'm being diplomatic, she said. Her voice was lower than I expected. Calm. Thoughtful. Not shy. I smiled. Taylor Ashford. I know. That nearly made me laugh. Do you? I work in this building, she said. It would be concerning if I didn't. Dry. Sharp. No flutter. No gratitude. No little social scramble people often do when they think I've honored them with direct attention. Lovely. And here I was hoping for a more dramatic introduction. I assumed you get enough of those. Only the bad ones. That drew the smallest curve from her mouth. Progress. Gabrielle Delaney, she said after a beat. Though I assume you already knew that. Only because I asked. Of course you did. I turned slightly toward her, letting amusement settle between us. Should I apologize? For asking? No. She tilted her head. For sounding like you're accustomed to having information handed to you on demand? Possibly. I looked at her properly then. Most people don't speak to me like that unless they're trying to impress me. She was doing it because it was true, which was inconveniently attractive. I am accustomed to it, I admitted. I noticed. And does that bother you? Her gaze didn't move from mine. Not as much as the fact that you know exactly what effect you have on people. There it was. The thing most people feel but are too polite, too dazzled, or too ambitious to say aloud. I smiled slower this time. That bothers you? It makes me careful. For the first time that evening, something in me shifted. Not just flirtation. Something narrower. Sharper. Interest with teeth. That, I said softly, may be the most interesting thing anyone said to me all week. Her eyes flicked briefly to my mouth, then back up. Then you should get out more. And she walked away before I could answer. I stood there for half a second, looking at the space she'd left behind, and felt a laugh press against the back of my teeth. Naomi appeared beside me the way judgment always does, without invitation and exactly on time. Well, she asked. I picked up another glass from a passing tray. She's careful. Naomi's brows lifted. You say that like you found religion. She said I know the effect I have on people. Naomi considered that. She's observant. She said it like a warning. That's because it was. I turned to face her fully. She fascinates me. Naomi smiled, too pleased too quickly. There she is. Don't start. I haven't started. Starting would sound like, Taylor, this is the first time you've described a woman without mentioning her mouth first. I stared at her. Naomi's smile widened. See? Now I've started. I glanced back toward the room, looking for Gabrielle without meaning to. Well, Naomi asked. How bad is it? I took a measured sip of champagne. Not bad. Naomi followed my line of sight. That bad then. I should probably tell you here that Naomi is one of the few people on Earth who has known me long enough to see more than one version of me and romanticize none of them. We met at a charity committee meeting 12 years earlier, hated each other for 40 minutes, aligned against a man who used the phrase female energy in public, and never recovered from the intimacy of mutual contempt. She knew when I was performing ease and when I actually was at ease. That night, unfortunately, I was not. The rest of the reception passed in fragments. A donor asked whether our new arts campus would include educational outreach. I said yes and meant it. A trustee tried to introduce me to a hedge fund manager with earnest shoulders. I escaped. A young curator thanked me for remembering her mother's surgery, and I felt the usual flicker of satisfaction at getting something human right in a room built mostly for vanity. And every few minutes, my eyes found Gabrielle again. Across the installation wall. Speaking with the museum liaison. Laughing once with a woman from the board of the public theater. Standing alone for 30 seconds near the terrace doors, reading a placard with the concentration of someone who still gave things her full attention. Once, she looked back and caught me doing it. This time her expression changed just slightly. Amusement, maybe, which was somehow more dangerous than disapproval. By the end of the evening, I had not spoken to her again. This was intentional. I enjoy many things in life. One of them is letting a woman wonder whether I will come back. On the way out, Naomi linked her arm through mine. You're smiling to yourself, she said. I'm thinking. That smile means either litigation or desire. Sometimes both. Not usually with women you've spoken to for under 3 minutes. I let out a soft breath and looked toward the waiting line of black cars. She didn't react the way people usually do. Naomi's tone sharpened with interest. No. I slid into the back seat beside her. She reacted like a woman who had already decided I wasn't entirely safe. Naomi leaned back, satisfied in a way I disliked on principle. And you enjoyed that. I respected it. She turned her head and looked at me. Taylor. What? You're using your serious voice. I stared out the window as the city moved past in ribbons of light. She interests me, I said. Naomi's smile softened, just enough to become affectionate. I know. By Wednesday, I had acquired 3 entirely legitimate reasons to encounter Gabrielle Delaney again, and 1 illegitimate one dressed in such impeccable scheduling that it practically deserved legal protection. The first was a briefing on regional programming for the Foundation's next quarter. The second was a strategic lunch involving community partners, 2 city officials, and 1 man from development who collected metaphors the way other people collect watches. The third was a review of a donor proposal Gabrielle's office had commented on. The illegitimate one was that I found myself asking questions nobody else needed answered in person. This was unlike me. Usually, if I'm interested in a woman, I know exactly what category she belongs in. A flirtation. A distraction. A beautifully arranged evening. A mistake I'll enjoy and later classify as inevitable. Gabrielle refused categorization after 1 conversation and 2 glances. Annoying. On Thursday afternoon, I caught sight of her through the glass wall of a conference room on the 17th floor, standing at the head of a table with a folder in one hand, explaining something to a small group with the measured confidence of a woman who had built herself carefully. Not loud. Not showy. But absolutely in command of her material. This, too, I found inconveniently attractive. One of the younger executives sitting with me at the time was still speaking when my attention drifted. He paused mid-sentence. Taylor. I looked back at him. You were about to say something brave and financially questionable. That made the room laugh, and the moment passed. But I had seen her. And once I saw her in daylight, in motion, in command of a room that wasn't trying to seduce anyone, I understood the scale of my problem. She wasn't just beautiful. She was substantial. And if you've spent enough years around women who know how to be wanted, you learn that substance is rarer than beauty and far more difficult to forget. By Friday evening, Naomi came to my apartment for a drink and found me standing barefoot in my kitchen, opening a second bottle of wine while pretending not to be distracted. My apartment occupied the upper floors of a restored pre-war building on the Upper East Side. Warm wood. Clean lines. Art with opinions. Large windows looking over a city I had spent years mastering and still occasionally admired against my own will. It was not ostentatious. I hate ostentation. But it was unmistakably mine. Expensive, disciplined, softened by a taste for amber light and impossible flowers. Naomi stepped in, took one look at me, and laughed. Oh, this is delicious. I glanced over my shoulder. You haven't even sat down. I don't need to sit down to recognize a woman trying to look unaffected while opening Burgundy like a defense mechanism. I handed her a glass. You're dramatic. You're pacing. I wasn't. Not technically. I was simply moving around my kitchen with a little more intention than necessary. Naomi leaned one hip against the island and accepted the wine. How many times have you seen her since the reception? Twice. Spoken. Briefly. Alone. No. Naomi took a sip and watched my face. And yet here you are, drinking like a widow in Kashmir. That feels excessive. Does it? I exhaled through my nose and set the bottle down. She's not impressed by me. Naomi blinked. That's your complaint? It's an observation. It sounds like a prayer. I tried not to smile. Naomi's expression softened, then turned thoughtful. Do you know what this actually is? Curiosity. No, she swirled the wine in her glass. Curiosity is when you ask for background. This is when your ego and your body meet a woman at the same time and both realize they are no longer in charge. I looked at her. That's obscene, I said. It's accurate. I leaned against the counter opposite her. She isn't indifferent. No, Naomi agreed. That would bore you. She's interested. She's just careful enough to make you work. There was that word again. Careful. She mentioned that, I said. Naomi smiled into her glass. Now I know you're finished. I shook my head and looked toward the city. You're enjoying this too much. Because for once, she said, you actually care whether a woman sees you clearly. I did not answer that. The following Tuesday was the gala. The same gala where, as I've already told you, I walked into a ballroom full of donor money and candlelight, only to find David Lang standing too close to Gabrielle Delaney as though the universe had decided I needed character development. But before that moment, before his hand at her back and Naomi's merciless delight, the evening had actually begun rather well. I had dressed with unusual care and then pretended not to notice. A silk gown the color of pale gold. Hair loose. Earrings simple enough to imply confidence. A bracelet my mother once called dangerous because it looked innocent until the light hit it correctly. The kind of look that says I am not trying to ruin your concentration and therefore absolutely will. Naomi met me downstairs in black and informed me I looked like expensive regret. I chose to take it as a compliment. The gala was held at a private museum space in Midtown, all marble floors and controlled grandeur. When we stepped inside, the room shifted the way rooms do when people recognize me without wanting to be obvious about it. Heads turned. Conversations brightened. Donor waved. Someone from the mayor's office made a point of crossing over to greet me. I moved through it with practiced warmth, giving everyone enough attention to feel fortunate and none enough to misunderstand me. This is a skill. It is also labor. The myth is that women like me live inside our power as if it were natural weather. The truth is that attention is a climate you learn to regulate or drown in. A man from an investment group kissed my cheek and told me the city looked better every time I entered a room. I thanked him for the lie. A woman from the opera board asked whether I was finally attending her dinner next month. I said I would consider forgiving her seating charts. An older philanthropist squeezed my hands and told me her niece had copied my career path, which was flattering in the abstract and terrifying in any specific sense. And then I saw Gabrielle. And David. And everything after that became narrative. This is where we return to the beginning. David's hand at her back. My donor speaking to my face while I forgot language. Naomi at my shoulder with the moral support of a woman who enjoys catastrophe when it's wearing couture. I set my now empty glass down and looked at Naomi. Who is he? I asked. David Lang, she said at once, because Naomi always knew things 5 minutes before they became relevant. Litigation attorney. Donor circle. Has been orbiting her for months. Orbiting. I disliked that word on contact. Is she with him? Naomi studied them. Not officially. That sounds evasive. It sounds like reality. Across the room, David bent closer to say something in Gabrielle's ear. She turned her face toward him listening. Not leaning in. Not melting. But smiling. Something hot and unreasonable moved through my bloodstream. Not pain. Not quite anger. Something more precise. A sharp, interior refusal. I do not mind competition when I've chosen the game. This, however, felt different. This felt like arriving late to a conversation my body had already started without consulting me. And if you're still with me, this is where you should probably like the video and subscribe, because this was the exact moment the situation stopped being elegant and started becoming personal. Also subscribe if you want the next part, because trust me, I do not continue behaving responsibly from here. Naomi tilted her head and looked at me in profile. You are absolutely going over there. I kept my eyes on them. Maybe. You've gone still. I'm thinking. No, Naomi said. You're planning. Across the room, Gabrielle looked up. Her eyes found mine almost immediately. That more than anything lit the fuse. Because she had not been scanning for me. She had simply known. Recognition crossed her face. Then awareness. Then something quieter, darker, more difficult. Not guilt. Not delight. Tension. Good. I watched David say something else close to her ear. My jaw tightened before I could stop it. Naomi nearly choked on her champagne. Oh, this is excellent. I hate you. No, you don't. You need witnesses. That too was true. I straightened my spine, adjusted nothing, and crossed the room with the kind of calm people mistake for innocence. It was not innocence. It was discipline. David saw me first. Of course he did. Men like that always do. The polished ones. The strategic ones. The ones who know how to identify power before it reaches them and smile as if it's already agreed to dinner. Taylor, he said warmly as I came to a stop beside them. Good to see you. David. I offered him my hand. Always a pleasure. It was not always a pleasure. But social civilization is built on noble lies. His handshake was confident, expensive, and exactly the sort of thing law schools like to produce in bulk. He gestured toward Gabrielle. I was just telling Gabi I'm trying to convince her to stop being impossible to impress. I turned to her. She held my gaze over the rim of her champagne glass, expression unreadable, mouth soft enough to be dangerous. Is that what he's doing? I asked. A flicker of amusement moved through her eyes. That seems to be the working theory. David laughed. I smiled at him as if I supported his continued existence, then let my attention settle very deliberately back on her. Then I'm relieved, I said. For a moment I thought he was failing. David took that as a joke. Gabrielle knew better. Her mouth curved. Small. Real. Brief. I felt it like a hand at the base of my spine. Have you two worked together long? David asked, looking between us. No, Gabrielle said. Not nearly long enough, I added. Her eyes lifted to mine. There was a warning there. Also interest. Also, unless I had finally lost every useful instinct I possessed, the faintest trace of heat. Wonderful. I was about to become unbearable. David, to his credit, tried not to look displaced. Gabrielle keeps the foundation from embarrassing itself artistically. I'm only here because she promised not to let me say anything vulgar around the donors. That sounds wise, I said. Though a little vulgarity can be refreshing in the right room. Gabrielle tilted her head. This isn't the right room. No, I said, looking at her. Probably not. David shifted almost imperceptibly. Men rarely enjoy being made peripheral, even when they've wandered into it voluntarily. How do you two know each other? He asked. Gabrielle opened her mouth. I've been trying to meet Gabrielle properly for over a week, I said smoothly. That got her attention. Not dramatically. Gabrielle Delaney did not hand out dramatic reactions for free. But I saw the exact moment she realized I had chosen honesty as a weapon. David glanced at her, then back to me, amused. Trying. Gabrielle answered before I could. Taylor has a very flexible definition of trying. I smiled. That's unkind. It's precise. David laughed again, slower this time, like a man hearing a language he didn't quite speak. I leaned one shoulder subtly toward Gabrielle, closing the conversational triangle by half an inch. Barely anything. Socially invisible. Physically loud. And what would your definition be? I asked her. She lowered her glass. Trying usually involves saying what you want. I should have found that annoying. Instead, something low and bright moved through me. God, she was good. So noted, I said. I'll be more direct in future. David smiled. See? You're reforming powerful women now. Dangerous hobby. Gabrielle's smile didn't fully reach me this time. She was aware of him. Of me. Of the room. Of the fact that my tone with her had shifted half a degree too intimate for safety. I don't think Taylor needs reforming, she said. No. I asked softly. Her eyes met mine. I think she knows exactly what she's doing. There was again. The thing I disliked and wanted and respected all at once. David took a sip of his drink, perhaps deciding this was no longer a conversation in which he held majority ownership. The music shifted somewhere behind us. Soft strings. Too expensive to be memorable. I smiled at him. You've known her longer than I have. Is she always this generous? David glanced at Gabrielle with open affection. Only with people she hasn't decided to destroy. David, Gabrielle said dry. What? He asked. You have a look. She does, I said. Gabrielle turned to me fully, one brow lifting. Dangerous woman. And what does it mean when you recognize it so quickly? She asked. That I pay attention. David wisely did not interrupt. I let the silence sit just long enough to become visible. Then I turned to him. Would you excuse us for 1 minute? I need Gabrielle's opinion on something before I let strangers donate irresponsibly in public. David blinked. Now, if it were unimportant, I said pleasantly, I'd have one of the vice presidents handle it. He smiled because what else was he going to do with that? Before he could answer, Gabrielle set down her glass on a passing tray and said, without looking at him, 1 minute. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll be near the sculpture tables. Brave man, I said. When he left, the air changed. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. It just sharpened. Gabrielle folded one arm loosely across her waist and studied me with that composed, knowing expression that was beginning to do extremely unfortunate things to my concentration. That was rude, she said. It was efficient. To him. Yes. And to me. I took my time answering, if only because every instinct I had was suddenly trying to arrive at my mouth at once. To you, I said, it was honest. Her face didn't change, but I saw the pulse shift at the base of her throat. That's a generous word for whatever this is. I'm being careful with my language. That would be a first. I smiled. You make me ambitious. She looked away then, just briefly toward the room. Toward safety. Toward the version of the evening where David Lang stood at her side and I remained just another polished threat in a gold dress. When she looked back, her voice was quieter. You don't get to do this just because you decided you're interested. There it was. Not fear. Not refusal. Boundary. I felt an immediate respect for it. Also desire. Also the nearly adolescent urge to step closer just to see whether she'd hold the line. I know, I said. She studied my face as if checking whether I actually meant that. And yet here you are. Yes. Why? There were easier answers. Because I find you compelling. Because I wanted to speak to you alone. Because I haven't stopped thinking about you since last Thursday. All true. All too polished. Instead, I said the one thing that cost me something. Because I didn't like seeing him with you. For the first time since I'd met her, Gabrielle Delaney looked honestly caught off guard. Not won. Not softened. Just struck. Her breath changed. Barely. That, she said after a second, is a very bold thing to admit for someone claiming restraint. I never claimed maturity. That did it. She laughed softly, once, low in her throat, unwilling and beautiful. It went through me like clean damage. You're impossible, she said. Frequently. And jealous. Annoyingly so. You barely know me. I stepped closer, not enough to corner her, enough that only one of us could pretend not to feel it. True, I said. But I'm learning. Her eyes dropped once to my mouth. The room disappeared for one dangerous second. When she looked back up, her voice had gone quieter still. You don't get to win just because you want something. Something inside me smiled. There you are. I know, I said again. Do you? Yes. Then why do I feel like you still think this is a game you can play better than everyone else? Because until recently, it always was. Because I am very good at being wanted. Because wanting someone back in a way that matters is less familiar territory, and I dislike that more than I'm prepared to confess in a ballroom. Instead, I said, because I haven't decided yet whether you're the reason I'm losing my usual advantages or the reward for surviving without them. Her breath caught. Just slightly. Good. Not because I wanted to win. Because I wanted proof she felt this too. Taylor, she said, and my name in her mouth was not a warning so much as a problem. Yes. That line probably works on a lot of people. Not the ones I actually care about. Silence. Real silence this time. Charged enough to alter posture. She searched my face for a beat too long, and I knew with a clarity that bordered on cruelty that if I touched her now, even her wrist, even the inside of her elbow, the entire night would tilt. So naturally I did not. Growth. Instead I stepped back half a pace and let the room return between us. Go back to David, I said lightly. Naomi says consequences are important for my development. That surprised her enough to make her smile again. Naomi sounds wise. She's unbearable. Usually a sign of accuracy. She'll be thrilled you said that. The amusement faded from her face, replaced by something more careful. I'm not with him, she said. My expression remained perfectly neutral. Internally, choirs. No. No, a pause. But that doesn't make whatever this is simpler. No, I agreed. It really doesn't. She looked at me for one long second, then reached for another glass from a passing tray. Good night, Taylor. That sounds dismissive. That's because I'm trying not to make a worse decision. I smiled slowly. About me. Her eyes flicked to mine. About staying. Then she turned and walked back toward the lights before I could answer. I stood there with my untouched champagne and the unsettling awareness that for the first time in a very long time, I had no interest in being admired by the room. Only by one woman. Naomi appeared at my side 2 seconds later, as inevitable as judgment. Well, she asked. I watched Gabrielle move across the floor toward David, every line of her composed, every step elegant, every nerve in my body still fixed on the fact that she had said she was trying not to stay, which meant she had wanted to. I exhaled. This, I said, has become inconveniently real. Naomi took a sip of champagne. Oh, sweetheart. I glanced at her. Don't. She smiled into her glass. You're already doomed. And that was the night I stopped telling myself Gabrielle Delaney was simply a woman I found interesting. She had become the woman I could not stop orienting toward. The woman whose caution excited me more than another person's certainty. The woman who looked at me as if she could see both the danger and the effort underneath it. And the worst part? I was no longer sure whether I wanted to win. I was beginning to suspect I wanted something far more inconvenient. To be taken seriously. By her. That was the beginning. And it only got messier from there. So tell me in the comments, what hit you hardest in part 1? Whose side are you already on, Taylor's or Gabi's? And where are you listening from? If you want part 2, like the video and subscribe. That really does help the channel more than people think, and you do not want to miss what happens when Taylor decides to stop pretending this is casual.